Hi, welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Wang Guan, sitting in for Liu Xin. In this series, we dissect the stories making headlines around the world and talk to my guests to fill in the missing pieces of the puzzle. So join us in real time by sending us your comments or questions via the CGTN webpage on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or Weibo. Or if you're watching this live, email us at the CGTN at thepointwithalex@cgtn.com. Let us know what you think. We start our live streaming, as you know, every Friday at 11 a.m. Beijing time. Get in touch, and we might just read out your comments. First of all, let's look at some of the viewers' comments from last week when we talk about Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region's new language policy. Facebook user Edwin Lowe said, "Time will tell. Chinese people are conservative. They don't tell the whole world what they're doing." I would agree, and that's why I think some of you guys should be watching our programs more regularly. Twitter user King Hu Wan said, "What's the big deal that Chinese is taught as the main language in China? That is a norm around the globe, just as English is taught as the main language in the USA. If people want to continue teaching other languages, simply open a school for it. I attended Chinese school in USA." All perspectives and comments are welcome. Keep them coming, please. Now, this week, we're going to look at U.S. President Donald Trump's speech at the United Nations General Assembly, which was followed by Chinese President Xi Jinping's address to the General Assembly. The two speeches are being interpreted as the latest sign of rising China-U.S. tensions. But what else is there? Before we go to more details, though, a bit of background. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. It was formed after two devastating world wars in the first half of the last century. Founded in 1945, the UN currently has 193 member states. And it plays a very important role in maintaining international peace and security, delivering humanitarian aid, promoting sustainable development, and upholding international laws. The annual General Assembly is an opportunity for the world's leaders and diplomats to speak about issues that concern the most. Over the years, the General Assembly has heard historic speeches, impassioned arguments and accusations, and also, unfortunately, fictions and outright lies. President Trump has given many speeches this past half year as he prepares for what is shaping up to be a very heated campaign cycle. Trump is known for giving misinformation and unsubstantiated claims that the Washington Post, so much so that the Washington Post's tireless presidential fact-checker team has published a new book entitled Donald Trump and His Assault on Truth. It compiles a staggering total of 16,241 false or misleading claims made during President Trump's first 3 years in office. This is averaging 15 misleading claims per day. 15 per day. Now, on Tuesday, at the United Nations General Assembly, President Trump took his signature style there, and in minutes, the president already exceeded his usual daily average. In the interest of time, here are just some of those claims. Have listened to what the president said.
"We have waged a fierce battle against the invisible enemy, the China virus, which has claimed countless lives in 188 countries."
Well, this is misleading. President Trump repeatedly used the term of China virus. It is more than just a reference to the origin of the pandemic. It is also part of his campaign to advance a conspiracy theory about the virus leaking from a lab in Wuhan, intentionally or accidentally. This claim has already been rejected by President Trump's own Director of National Intelligence. "Yes, I have," said President Trump on May 1st, 2020, when asked about whether he has seen evidence to suggest the virus originated in the lab. When later asked for more details, President Trump said, "I cannot tell you that. I'm not allowed to tell you that." Nearly 5 months later, there still has not been a shred of evidence to back up his claim. Now, in his most recent article titled "Trump Lied About Science," published on September 18th, Holden Thorpe, editor-in-chief of Science Journal, says that because famed Washington Post journalist Bob Woodward recorded him, we can hear Trump's own voice saying that he understood precisely that severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2 was deadly and spread through the air. Trump lied, plain and simple. He also noted that monuments in Washington, D.C. have chiseled into them words spoken by real leaders during crises. Confidence, said Franklin Roosevelt, thrives on honesty, on honor, and on sacrifices, on sacredness of obligations, on faithful protection, and on unselfish performance. Trump's first false claim was followed by more false claims about America's pandemic fighting success. We pioneered life-saving treatments, reducing our fatality rate 85% since April, said the president. We don't know the source of this 85% reduction. We wish it were true, but obviously it could be a self-assigned number. The same day, the president was bragging about his leadership at the United Nations. Coronavirus deaths in the United States, unfortunately and tragically, passed the 200,000 mark. In fact, President Trump went on the cover of Time magazine's September edition with the title, "How many more lives will be lost before the U.S. gets it right?" Now, many believe the president perhaps could have shown more sympathy or respect, at least for the life lost during this pandemic. Commenting on the recent wave of police brutality and violent responses to the demonstrations against it, President Trump was quoted as saying that, quote, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." Compare that to former presidents made during similar incidents in the past. Former U.S. President Barack Obama said that we should care about it. We can't not dismiss it. And George W. Bush said, "I felt anger, I felt pain." Then President Trump began a prolonged attack on China. Listen to this.
As we pursue this bright future, we must hold accountable the nation which unleashed this plague onto the world, China. In the earliest days of the virus, China locked down travel domestically while allowing flights to leave China and infect the world.
Well, this is another conspiracy that has been rejected by many. The comprehensive review by factcheck.org shows this falsehood originating in a column in the Sunday Times on April 5th by historian and author Niall Ferguson, and later rebutted by Daniel Bell, Dean of School of Political Science and Public Administration at Shandong University. Using flight data from the Civil Aviation Administration of China, Bell was able to show that international flights were cancelled, along with domestic flights, on January the 23rd, the very day the lockdown on Wuhan was imposed. Now, Ferguson later acknowledged this fact in an update of his own article, but Tuesday was not the first time, nor even the second time President Trump repeated this claim, even though factcheck.org alerted the White House to its findings. No world leader paying attention to their daily briefings on the pandemic would declare the virus a hoax or claim that it, quote, will disappear one day like a miracle. But President Trump said both, even though, as clearly documented in Bob Woodward's new book, Rage, Trump claims he knew the virus was both deadly and serious from the start. So it seems that as well as lying to the United Nations, Trump also lied to the American public. Olivia Troche, former assistant to Vice President Pence and who used to serve on the White House's coronavirus task force, alleges that during one meeting she attended, President Trump said, "Maybe this COVID thing is a good thing. I don't like shaking hands with people. I don't have to shake hands with these disgusting people." Presumably, some of these quote-unquote disgusting people Trump has talked about is the very people he's counting on these days to return him to the White House for another 4 years. Perhaps Trump saw the speech as a chance to make a last-ditch effort to divert attention from his administration's handling of the pandemic by passing the buck for the blame. He certainly believes there are plenty who deserve to be blamed for America's problems. China, the WTO, the Democrats, his predecessors, his opponents, generals, governors, mayors, the press, scientists, medical staff, you name it. Almost everyone, in fact, apart from the very man who has been running America for the last 4 years and responsible, presumably, for keeping it safe and secure. Now, on the same day, Chinese President Xi Jinping also addressed the United Nations General Assembly Hall via video, and observers noted that President Xi struck a very different tone. This is what the Chinese president said.
中国将始终做多边主义的践行者。
China will continue to be a true follower of multilateralism It'll stay actively engaged in reforming and developing the global governance system. It'll firmly uphold the UN-centered international system, firmly uphold the international order underpinned by international law, and firmly defend the UN's central role in international affairs.
Now, in his speech, President Xi addressed the question of how China and the international community should face this period of uncertainty, change, and increased division among nations. He proposed 4 pillars upon which the UN could regain its place in the world. Number 1, justice. Number 2, the rule of law. Number 3, cooperation. And number 4, action. Xi said the world must stand up for the UN as central to global governance. A main focus, of course, is the prevention and control of the COVID-19 pandemic and how to build global solidarity in that regard. Have a listen to this.
Facing the virus, we should enhance solidarity and get this through together. We should follow the guidance of science, give full play to the leading role of the World Health Organization, and launch a joint international response to beat this pandemic. Any attempt of politicizing the issue or stigmatization must be rejected.
Xi promised again that China will make COVID-19 vaccine, when they become available, a global public good, and the developing world will be given priorities to use them. Observers say President Xi and President Trump were talking to different audiences there. President Xi was offering China solutions to some of the most salient global challenges to the audience of the world, whereas President Trump was mainly talking to his supporters on the state of his campaign. Now, when we come back, we'll be breaking down these speeches and more issues to come. Stay tuned. To talk about the 2 speeches made by the Chinese and American presidents at the United Nations General Assembly, we have with us Michael Johns, political analyst and former speechwriter and advisor for President George H.W. Bush. Welcome back, sir. Margaret Kimberley, senior columnist from Black Agenda Report. And Victor Gao, chair professor at Soochow University. Wang Cong, chief reporter at Global Times. Welcome to all of you. Wang Cong, why don't you pick it up? I mean, what's your understanding, your take from President Xi and President Trump's speeches?
Yeah, I think you were right that they were speaking to completely two different audiences when they made those remarks at the UN General Assembly. President Trump went there, did what he does. You know, he used it as a stump speech to speaking directly to his supporters. But in doing so, that he spreads lies. And I think I don't want to go into his remarks specifically, because all those assertions and accusations were completely false. Many of them you already said in your monologue. But what I want to say is what this speech means for the UN and for the U.S. President Trump, I think for the last 4 years, the U.S. Has become a very disruptive force in the global community. And for any country, anyone who still doubts about that role, I think that speech should tell it all. He went there, speak for 7 minutes. Half of them were grandstanding, talking about his achievements, domestic achievements, because there were none global achievements. Another half, he went on attack on China. Yes, on the appearance, it was an attack on China, but it was really an attack on the UN and the international community, because he wasted that time to speak about his own political agenda rather than a global challenges, you know, from environmental, from public health, from sustainable development. Right. So it was really an attack, and I think the world should know how the U.S. Let its toxic domestic politics to poison the global community, and they should be very, very careful what's coming next.
Michael Johns, do you agree with Wang Cong? What's your take?
No, I don't. I think the president was correct in making the coronavirus pandemic a centerpiece of the discussion. It's entirely incorrect to say that the president's had no domestic or foreign policy accomplishments. He has had extraordinary domestic and foreign policy accomplishments. We just came off an unprecedented Middle East agreement that was entirely the doing of this administration.
Which he didn't mention at the speech.
Well, there's limited time, and I believe that this pandemic and the world's ability to react to it and our ability to provide leadership on that was a centerpiece issue, and it was appropriate to discuss. I think that's more of a niche regional issue. I think the critical issue, though, as it relates to the United Nations, is that we founded the United Nations in good faith. I think the aspirations and goals of the UN continue to be ones that we all support in the United States. The problem is that we are coming to rely on countries of the world to support themes like development, democracy, freedom, human rights, who themselves have some of the most appalling track records. So, I think as it relates to China's involvement in the UN, this is one of the greatest issues that it confronts. It has no global credibility on human rights. It's been consistently ranked one of the worst human rights abusers in the world. It has more individuals in prison political prisoners imprisoned in China than any country in the world.
Victor, do you want to respond to what Michael said?
Thank you very much. I think what President Trump did at the United Nations General Assembly in delivering this speech is an insult to the intelligence of mankind. I think, let's be honest, we all attach great importance to human rights. The human rights for the American
I'm not
people,
sure that's true.
Prove their right to be led by the government with science, rather than putting the wrong politics above science, rather than having more than 200,000 good, God-fearing American lives being lost, rather than having the U.S. leaders having the blood of the good American people on their hands. Who to blame?
There's no blood. There's no blood on the
rights of the American people. The American people should not suffer such insults and humiliation and loss of life and infections that many, that massive. I think it is time to call a spade a spade. President Trump failed the American people, and he cannot insult the intelligence of mankind as a whole. We all want to have human rights. We want human rights to make sure that we are alive and our lives are not taken away from us by the wrong leaders like President Donald Trump.
Margaret, what do you make of all this?
Yes.
Obviously, people cannot agree.
No. Well, I thought that was most striking about Trump's speech was that it was all, as typical of him, it was him bragging about accomplishments, all of which are quite debatable. His continued attacks on China are really unprecedented. I mean, in the days of the Cold War, I don't remember American presidents insulting other countries, telling lies about other countries at the UN like he does. If you want to talk about the COVID-19 virus, the U.S. has had 200,000 deaths. China has had fewer than 5,000, am I correct? So the country where we first started hearing about this disease is the one that has made great strides. And that, to me, is a reflection of human rights and respect for human rights that the United States, this country we're told is powerful and great and rich, but none of those things seem to impact the lives of ordinary people. Americans have no expectation of getting good health care, millions of people thrown out of work. It's the United States that was unable to come up with a test for COVID. That's not China's fault. So it's the fault of our system, the fault of Trump as a person. And I just think it's striking that President Xi Jinping's remarks were about the world, about China trying to help the world. And yes, he talked about the strides his country has made, but it was about China as part of a whole, as China as being part of the world community and not being, once again, Trump presenting America as this hegemon, which has the right to do what it wants to do to anyone.
Well, Michael, President Trump said during the speech that the future doesn't belong to the globalists. It belongs to the patriots. What do you make of, that speech? Many consider that a very unilateralist, America First approach that runs counter to, the globalist, multilateralist vision that the United Nations have been promoting.
It has to do with the fact that when it comes to addressing the economic needs, the social needs, the policy structure, the governance, the individuals who run those governments, those should be the democratic selections of the people of those countries, not the people of the world. So, under those auspices, we may come over there and want to say, hey, you guys should have open, free, and fair elections. You shouldn't have a president for life. You shouldn't have 3 million Uyghurs in prison camps, concentration camps, reminiscent of Nazi Germany. You shouldn't be suppressing the Tibetans. You shouldn't be breaking violations with Hong Kong. But let me make my conclusion. Your rebuttal to all those things is likely to be, those are China's concerns. And this is where I think we have a real challenge with the United Nations, because the U.S. Is the most powerful economic country in the history of the world. It's brought a higher standard of living to the people of the world than any country in the world, and yet it's imperfect. But that's why our democratic political system is important, and why it's worked elsewhere around the world too, and being able to afford people of countries to make improvements continuously as their country and those challenges evolve.
We heard you, Michael. Victor.
Yes, please allow me to add a point. The previous American panelist mentioned about Xinjiang. I'm very close to Xinjiang right now. I would say the fundamental problems in Xinjiang is the fact that Xinjiang actually borders with Afghanistan. And the war led by the United States.
Does that entitle you to put 3 million people in concentration camps?
Almost 20 years. It's still raging on. That's the fundamental source of
you guys always smile and wave your hands. Are you denying that there's 2 to 3 million Uyghurs?
Michael, have you been to Xinjiang and you've seen these people in lockup?
Restore peace and stability in Afghanistan. And that will take a lot of
pressure Xinjiang. Well, we're doing that. We're doing that. I'm not hearing your praise.
Let's do the international investigation into the war crimes.
The president of France proposed that China is refusing entry into that.
No, you're not refusing.
Okay,
they're
inviting let me just make one point. The president of France at the UN has asked that there be an independent assessment of the treatment of the Uyghurs and the alleged 3 million Uyghurs in prison camps.
U.S. is no longer a member of the UN Human Rights Council. It will have to withdraw. Also,
very good move.
What do you think? How about China go to the UN and propose an independent assessment of the treatment of minorities in the United States?
That's what I was.
There's still
protests
going on in the U.S. streets, and their treatment of the African Americans and the Latinos. I mean, these are still ongoing.
You comment
issues.
on those every day, and you embellish them every day.
Gentlemen, please. Kimberly, go ahead.
Yes, hi. Hello, everybody. I think it's funny. The number of Uyghurs in prison keeps going up. It was 1 million. It was 2 million now.
Well, we don't know because they won't let us inspect the area.
You don't know. That's right.
Well, let me just say, wait, you're all interrupting me. We do know for a fact there are 2 million people imprisoned in the United States. Most of them have not committed violent crimes. We have the worst mass incarceration system in the world. We have police who kill 1,000 people every year. So the United States is in no position to talk about human rights in China or anywhere else. If the United States has a right to go and see imprisoned people in Xinjiang or anywhere else in China, I would hope that Chinese would be able to send people here to see people imprisoned here with our draconian sentences, with our the resumption of the federal death penalty, juveniles, people being executed for crimes they committed as juveniles. I could go on and on. We have a dismal human rights record. But as far as, let's get back to the subject of the speech, of the president's speech, his speech was just for domestic consumption. It was for his supporters It was like a campaign stump speech. It was nothing that a president should say around the world. But that is the fault of much of the world for being vassal states of the United States. U.S. so-called allies, they may not like Trump, they may talk about him behind his back, but ultimately they do what he says. I think it's a good thing that China is now an economic competitor. America needs competitors. It is a very bad thing to have a unipolar world, and I'm glad the U.S. is being challenged. And as far as the coronavirus is concerned, the United States ought to invite Chinese doctors to come to this country and show us how to conquer it, because the Chinese have done that. So I really think it's time for Americans to stop acting as if we're so superior, when in every measure, quality of life, life expectancy is all dropping in the United States. So it's time for us to stop acting as though we are superior to the rest of the world, when by every measure we are not. All right.
I want to thank all our guests for today's discussion. That's all the time we have. Unfortunately, interesting conversation. Michael Johns, Margaret Kimberley, Victor Gao, and Wang Song, thank you all so very much. And that will do it for this edition of Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Wang Guan, filling in for Liu Xin. Until next week, I'll see you soon. Thank you. Take care.